Oh, gee, there's been lots of experiences, like the school system, for example. Lots of struggles there. They make all the educational decisions and decide what's best for deaf people, like they have to learn English to the exclusion of American Sign Language. And you try to challenge them on it, and there's just no way around it. They've got their minds made up, and you can't reason with them. You can't break the system. It's very difficult to fight the hearing system. I know when I was growing up, I thought, okay, I can tolerate it. But I'm pretty fed up with it these days. I have several children, and with the older ones, I worked really hard at socializing with the parents of their friends. And with the younger ones, a whole new group of parents, I just don't have the energy. I'm kind of fed up and tired of fighting the same old attitudes and having to wear the hearing aids in order to interact with them. And, you know, I just feel like it's not worth the effort. Unlike my husband, who continues to give it a good try. But depending on my mood, I just won't waste my time anymore. Another example is communication on the telephone. I'll send a note to school and I'll say, I'm deaf. Please use the relay service to contact me. And school people will continue to call home on the voice phone, asking my kids to give me a message. And it doesn't matter how many times I ask them to contact me through the relay service. Faxes have helped. I get a better response by getting them to communicate with me by fax.
I travel quite a bit, so I've had lots of experiences where I've seen minority groups oppressed. Specifically, say for example, when I was up in the northern part of Canada, I worked a lot with Aboriginal cultures and found that a lot of them were oppressed in the sense of being forced to learn English or learn a different language other than their own, and part of their own native language and their values and culture were denied. They weren't allowed to celebrate the knowledge that they had, and because their language, it's not a written form, but it's passed on vocally. For me, it was disheartening to see that they weren't allowed to express themselves. All my life, I've seen deaf community members ostracize interpreters, and sometimes it's a form of oppression because they allow them to make one mistake and then they label it forever that they'll never use that interpreter, and it's very hard for that interpreter to gain trust within the community again unless they're let in with a seasoned person or a well-trusted individual to regain that growth again. So it's difficult to see that happen because they don't have that opportunity to defend themselves, so to speak. You know, there's a judgment that's made, so interpreters get oppressed in that sense as well.
Well, I guess my first experience was after I graduated from Gallaudet University. I wasn't able to find any job, and I think I was being discriminated against because I was deaf. And then not long ago, actually, I realized that I was being discriminated against again for being a man. And now I'm into the era of being discriminated because of age. And I've relocated down to the States, so I'm now a foreigner. So that just makes matters worse. So I'm deaf, I'm male, I'm older, and I'm a foreigner. Go figure. Anyway. In terms of oppression, when I've tried to express what my feelings are to it, people don't seem to understand. So then that just causes me aggravation. And then I get reprimanded for that. And I try to express to people how I'm feeling about certain things, but they don't get it. And sometimes I feel like I must be invisible. They don't see me. They're not responding to me. They're not sitting down carrying on a conversation. I feel like I'm just not there. Or when I'm trying to talk to them, it looks like their attention is elsewhere. So I think maybe I should just stop talking.
Well, now, there was a time when I worked as a key punch operator, and it was very boring, and you really wanted to talk to somebody, and all the hearing women could. They could do punching in the data and be talking at the same time. So my friend who signed and I tried to punch in the data and sign, and the supervisor would be all over our case. Hey, get back to work, she'd say. And it would be like, wait a minute, that's no fair. And she'd say, nope, you're talking too much. You're not getting your job done. So a few times I just went crazy. I got way ahead in terms of finishing up the work just so we could have a little bit of time to chat. But it didn't seem fair. Another thing is that people don't want to learn to sign. They want me to talk. And then they're really disgusted if communication is difficult. And they make an ugly face. And that affects me very negatively. I know especially when I was a little girl, someone would stomp off, and I would stomp off and slam the door because it would just make me so angry. And my sister would say, oh, poor mom and dad, you're a little brat. But they didn't understand how frustrated I felt. I wasn't stupid. I had a good mind, and I knew I was being left out and misunderstood. Deaf people oppress other deaf people sometimes, too. Like maybe somebody wants to take some courses to become an ASL teacher, for example, and you'll see all kinds of backstabbing going on from one deaf person to another, and that has to do with the crab theory. And people will make up stories or criticize other people.
Exaggerating their speech and coming right in my face. Somehow they think that helps, or somehow I'll magically be able to hear, and it just doesn't work. Or what else? Just being on edge all the time. And checking to make sure that I'm okay, and it's like too much attention. And quite often I will just say yes, even if I'm not really understanding or following, because it's just too much work, and it just causes them so much anxiety. I mean, even if I'm trying to gesture something, then that just puts people off. I mean, a simple concept like sleep, and all of a sudden they're so anxious. It's like, just relax. But it just sets them on a panic. Sometimes when I'm not shown respect, even if a hearing person can sign, they choose not to when I'm in their presence. And I'm like, hey, I'm here, you should be signing, at least allowing me access to know what you're saying. But quite often that doesn't happen, so that lack of respect. So try to sign if I'm around.
Well, sometimes I teach students American Sign Language, and I'm their very first teacher. And I spend lots of time and energy building in language skills, and sometimes they say, well, I want to be an interpreter. So I encourage them, I refer them to the college across town, and they may over there face some problems. They might get turned down or have difficulty with the registrar or something. And I will fight for them and, really work on their behalf so that their dream can become true. And I see these little students move on, and in a couple of years they get out of the interpreting program, and all of a sudden they're too big for their britches. They have no time for me or anything. I mean, it blows my mind. All that I've done, the language I've given them, the support, where's the turnabout? And of course, hearing people still oppress deaf people to this very day. People will come up to me and they'll ask me, like, where's Main Street, for example, and I'll indicate that I'm deaf, and immediately they will look away from me and not want to continue trying to get directions from me. I mean, of course, the funny thing is then they may ask somebody who really doesn't even know. I could have written the answer to their question, but they didn't want to spend the time or energy because I'm deaf. I mean, directions to Main Street have nothing to do with whether one can hear or not. I could simply answer their question, but they choose not to take advantage of that. I think deaf people oppress other deaf people because they're so frustrated with all the accumulated oppression they've experienced on their own. And I also think because of poor literacy, that some more literate deaf people oppress those who are less literate. It's bad. It needs to stop.
I think having to wear the FM system is a form of oppression that I had to endure as a child. So I would say, no, thank you. I would try wearing a hearing aid, but all I'd get was noise. I wouldn't be able to distinguish words. So I could hear noises louder, but I couldn't understand what people were saying. And I had to fight to not have to wear those hearing aids because I didn't like people making these decisions for me when I'm the one who had to wear whatever their decisions were. When they were saying it's better for me, when they don't know what's better for me because they're not me. Let me know what's best for me. But I had to fight for that and finally get to the point where I didn't have to wear them. But geez. What else? When I was in grade 12, I would say most of my classes, other than English, were with hearing students. And I guess I was an A-B student. And I was thinking about going on to grade 13. At least that's what the teachers were saying. Well, you know, when I asked them why, they said, well, as a deaf student, you may need that. And you may want to teach. And I thought, no, I'm done and I'm going on to college. But they were adamant that I needed to stay that extra year because I was deaf. When I'd already been accepted into college and university, I thought, no, but thanks. So I finished, whereas all the other deaf students stayed another year, which was sad. I was worried that my parents would think that I was less a student because of that. I think just growing up in my family, having everyone talking to me, not really understanding what's going on, having them laugh and not knowing what was funny, having them react and not knowing what they were reacting to, had an impact. I wasn't invisible. I was there in the room, but I didn't feel I was of any importance to them. I didn't sense any respect. I think stereotyping that goes on, especially for an Indian woman, they tend to be seen as staying in one position or one place and not moving out of that box. It's true that there aren't a high number of deaf Indian men or women with high literacy skills, but I have high literacy skills. And when I apply, people ask me if I have a degree, and I say, well, actually, I have my master's, which kind of quiets them down. But I'm glad that I've got the education because that helps me. That gets me in the door because people are putting up blocks everywhere they can because of my deafness and because of my race. So I have to work doubly hard as anybody else to get to the same place that they are. So I'm glad because I've worked hard for it. But that's a big issue to them, yeah. Getting to a meeting at work and not having an interpreter totally puts me at a disadvantage, and being told that they'll give me a summary of everything later on. So after 2 hours, I meet with another person who says in 5 minutes what they talked about in 2 hours. And I'm thinking, that can't be it. And all I'm told is, well, I'm shortening it for you. So I don't get the full information. Or some interpreters actually oppress deaf people. Now, if you want to get me going, we can talk about that, because having an interpreter tell me what I can say and what I can't say is not their job. Their job is to interpret. So if I want to joke around or if I want to be serious, I can. And they just need to interpret it, not judge it and not decide whether or not it's going to be done, but just to interpret it. Or even tell other people what it is that I said or whatever is not their job. They should stay in their role. Nothing more, nothing less.
Well, I've had a few experiences with oppression, of course, in the residence at the School for the Deaf growing up because I was Asian. Kids would make fun of me. And I think that ethnic thing happened a lot. Of course, by the time I got to be older, I became the president of the dorm and became a leader. And so then I was respected and that kind of thing stopped. But when I was 10, 11 years of age, you know, I was still kind of figuring things out. And once I became a leader, the oppression from other deaf kids stopped. It was mostly ethnic, making fun of the fact that I was Chinese. That kind of behavior made me feel bad. There was no real support there for me from people who were not ethnic. And I guess I think language has always been a barrier and is a source of oppression sometimes, because you just get little tidbits of communication instead of the full information. When I graduated from Gallaudet, I went to a program, I can't remember exactly what it was called, some kind of a work experience program. But anyway, I was working for the Drug and Alcohol Administration there in Washington, D.C. as just for the work experience. And I didn't really find any discrimination there, because we used email for communication, and it was a federal job, so there weren't any real barriers other than social, which were there because I was the only deaf person there. So in the staff break room, for example, I really couldn't fit in. And then I guess that's about it. I haven't seen a lot of other impression at work. But when I look at myself and think about oppression, I don't think that I oppress others, because I understand how it feels to be oppressed. And of course, as a member of the deaf community, I've got that support. I've got my cultural group. If someone comes to me who's oral or hard of hearing or whatever, I do have some sympathy for them because they don't really fit in the deaf community. But they're not part of my group either. So I think it's good to have the deaf community, but we need to learn to support each other too. Otherwise, we're oppressing them in the same way we have been oppressed. And I just think we have to be sensitive to human feelings. It's one thing to have a strong deaf identity, but we have to think about inclusion instead of exclusion. That's my belief. We need to work together to bridge differences. Although I'm guilty of not doing that sometimes. It's a catch-22. If people will work with us, then we'll work with them.
There are deaf people from different ethnic backgrounds, and what I've noticed in the deaf community is that isn't an issue, because they see the bond, the similarities in the fact that they're both deaf. But I also noticed that there is some resistance to, well, especially with foreigners, to having some help from people who aren't deaf. Their perspectives may be different, even though the person's coming from a good place. There's that anxiousness because there's a language barrier. But that isn't the same if it's a deaf person trying to offer that same help, because they have that sameness, that experience of being deaf. So that just cements the bond.